Okay, everybody, we're going to get started now. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. For those of you who don't know, my name is Jennifer DeBobry, and I'm the planning director here at the Village of Islamorada. I'd like to thank you all for coming to our noise ordinance workshop. This is the first in what I hope to be several workshops on planning-related topics in the future. I'd also like to just take a moment to introduce planning staff that are here this evening. We have Regine Charles Bowser, who you might have gotten some emails from or some agendas from. We have Heidi Harum. We have Daniel Parabach, and we have Jamie Terry over here. So that's our planning staff. We also have Anita Muxo on our planning staff, but she was unable to make it this evening. So I just wanted to welcome you all and introduce the staff. If you haven't already, I'd ask you to sign in our sign-in sheet. That's the way we can keep track of who's here this evening, and you can also be informed of future workshops and next steps for this evening. In front of you tonight, you have 2 note cards. One of those you can use to jot down questions during our presentation. So when we get to the Q&A, the general Q&A, you can organize your thoughts so we're, not sort of all over the place. And then the second one we'd just like you to use for any future workshop ideas that you might have for the planning department, any planning topics that you might have, whether it be, let's look at transfer of development rights, let's talk about, habitat classifications, anything like that. Any ideas that you might have. We're looking for your input because we want this to work for you as the community. So please use that. If you don't have any ideas, that's fine too, but we'd like to see what your ideas are. So let me get going. Oops, I always do this wrong. Oh, did I shut it off? Oh. There we go. So this is just a brief agenda. So again, we just did the welcome and introduction. We're going to go through a brief presentation tonight. Then we're going to have a general Q&A about the presentation. And then we're doing something a little different tonight than I think you've done here before in Islamorada. I'm relatively new. For those of you that don't know, I've only been here just over a year. I have about almost 30 years of planning experience in Massachusetts. And when I did workshops in Massachusetts, this is how we sort of set things up, right? We have roundtable discussions. We get a variety of ideas together, and we talk about the issues, and we come back to the larger group and present a good, thoughtful discussion. So that's what I'm hoping we get through tonight. And then we're going to take a short break so we can compile some of your thoughts. We have some food for you that we're going to put out in a little bit. You can take part in that during the break. And then we're going to report back to the group from the roundtable, have a final Q&A, and go over next steps. So that's what our process is this evening. Obviously, people's schedules are tight. I'm aiming for this to be a couple hours, but if you have to leave for whatever reason, I totally understand. And, we hope that you get out of it whatever you can get out of it, and reach out to us if you have questions, after the fact. We're always here to answer your questions. So I'm going to get started with our presentation. So what is a noise ordinance? A noise ordinance is just a local law that sets limits on the noise levels that we allow, during specific times or areas of the village. The goal is to maintain the peaceful environment by addressing excessive noise that may cause a disturbance. The village's noise ordinance is Article 18 in our village code, and it provides for certain specifications. And the purpose of the ordinance, the village's noise ordinance, is to, and this is quoted exactly from the code, provide an efficient procedure for the prohibition of excessive, unnecessary, or unnaturally loud noises within the incorporated areas of the village. Its importance is that it regulates loud noise to protect public health, safety, and welfare within the village limits. Go ahead. Some of the key provisions of our village noise ordinance is Chapter 18, Section 18-63 is a general prohibition, which says that no person shall by any method or device make, continue, or cause to be made or continued any noise disturbance within the village except as allowed by this article. And then it goes on to have provisions about unmuffled exhaust, multifamily dwellings, pagers, public address systems, and telephones. We do have some exemptions in our code for emergency situations, which includes emergency alarms, emergency maintenance, emergency work by public employees, public property, including school athletic facilities and village-owned property like Founders Park. That is all exempted from the noise ordinance. Aircraft in conjunction with an approved use and zoning. So at Tavernero, there's no noise ordinance if an aircraft is coming into land there. Construction activity is allowed between 7 a.m. and sundown. And lawn and garden maintenance and machinery is allowed between 7 a.m. and sundown. I'm sorry, construction is 7:30 and sundown. Outdoor bands, amplified music, and entertainers on all approved commercial properties between 10 a.m. and 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, and 7 a.m. through 11 p.m. Friday and Saturday. So that's approved commercial properties in a commercial district. How do we measure the noise? That's the question we get a lot. Per the village code, our noise is measured by ordinary auditory senses of a reasonable person with normal sensitivities, without the assistance of a mechanical device. So they can't have a hearing aid, they can't have any mechanical device assisting their hearing of the noise. And the measurement should be taken not less than 50 feet from the sound source. Another option that some people have mentioned, and prior to this, we did say that you could provide written comments in advance of this meeting. We did receive a lot of comments, and a lot of people have suggested or asked about decibel meters. So another option would be to establish decibel levels for different types of noise in different areas and use a decibel meter for measurement. So that is another option. Enforcement procedures. So in the village, currently we enforce our code through the code compliance department in the village or the Monroe County Sheriff's Office. So if you have a complaint about noise, you would start with the village code compliance department. Obviously, if it's after hours, you could call the sheriff's office and they would come out and take a look for you. So that's the basic presentation on what our noise ordinance is and what a noise ordinance is. So are there any general Q&A questions about our noise ordinance or noise ordinances in general? We have a mic. I'm going to have someone grab it for you. Just give me 1 sec. Just so everybody can hear your question.
Thank you. Mark Mancini.
Thank you.
Many business owners who are here and other people who are kind of the left brain type deal with numbers. And before we can even do decibel meters and figure out what's an appropriate level, you first have to have a baseline. And the reason why I say that is because let's look at your body temperature. How do you know if you have a fever? Well, it's over 98.6. Well, where did we get the 98.6 from? We got 100 orifices. Hopefully we got 100 thermometers or cleaned the one off. We got an average, right? And that 98.6 is what is considered normal. Anything above that is a fever. I say that because I could be at the end of my property by my pool, have this on 10 o'clock at night, nothing going on, and it's 55 to 60 decibels. That's just wind, ocean noise, 55 to 60 decibels. I could walk out to Old Highway and be in front of my property. Now that moves to 65 to 70 decibels, 10 o'clock at night. I go out to Overseas Highway, 10 o'clock at night, not when it's real busy commercial traffic. It's 75 to 85 decibels. Without having a baseline of different areas of what is considered normal, to put in a decibel limit, you have to have first a baseline. You can't just say anything over 60 decibels is not appropriate when there could be no sound happening and it's already over 65 because of ambient noise that happens in the background with cars, with wind, and so forth. So the biggest concern for me is, again, I'm a numbers guy, and I want to know, I'll be fully compliant with any law. I just need to know where I need to be, and I'll be there. So when we have a wedding at our property and I walk out in the street and I do a decibel reading, it is strictly within ordinances. The police we hire at the weddings, they're there. They're always saying everything's great. It's not loud. So I guess my concern is it going to be subjective like that? And then 50 feet from a source, if you've got 3 acres and that loud source is in a small area, but everyone else around there, because if I do decibel readings on my property, I stay within even 75 decibels being at the corner of my lot. And that's probably 200 feet from the sound source. But again, that's over at the corner of the property by the ocean, and there's no one on that side. Now, sound does travel across water. I get that. And so we're going to work on seeing if I can come to his house this weekend and do a measurement. But from the road, we don't hear anything. And so that's the only thing I really have to concern myself with, because we've been a wedding venue for the last 15 years. And going back to, I think around 2007, Judy, if correct, I know the TDC and the Chamber really tried to push for destination weddings in the town. And I think Ken Strobel was one of the lawyers here who was on that board. He was on the board of the Chamber, I believe, in 2007. And the TDC both advocated for destination weddings to get more revenue into the town, to get jobs for people who need it here. And we're more than willing to abide by any and every law in place. Just give us a number and we'll fit it.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have any questions about the, don't turn it off.
It makes a cracking noise, I guess.
Joe Wishmeyer, Plantation Key. One thing that I noticed on here that's not being addressed is a lot of the vacation rentals, the short-term rentals. I know in my neighborhood there's a house that has 10 or 12 people all the time, and it just gets, they just come down here to party every night. That's what they come down for. And I remember in the past that an officer got up in one of the village meetings, said he got called to one of these, but they wouldn't let him in. There was really not much they could do. So I wish that something could be put in there specifically regarding some of these short-term rentals.
Perfect, thank you. Anyone else have anything?
Craig McBay, Plantation Key. As we're starting to go through this process, a question I do have is, do you have any sorts of stats as far as complaints you've had through code compliance or sheriff's office? Like, hey, these are the sorts of problems that we're seeing, so let's, what sort of solutions? Because I know every neighborhood, every business, there's all kinds of different problems from different people, but it's not the same problems everywhere. So do you guys have any kind of information to say, okay, this is the problems that we're seeing, these are the complaints we're getting?
I don't have that information this evening, but I do have the ability to print that information. We track all of our complaints through our City View permitting process, so I can certainly get that information out to everybody who signed up and put that on the list. I do know that back when I first started and this became a hot topic, I did ask the code department if they were seeing a lot of complaints, and the answer was no at that time. But that was 8-9 months ago, so I don't know what's happened since then, but I certainly can get those numbers out to you.
Okay, and one of the other, I guess, sort of question or comments, so decibel meters, they've come up over the years, time again. So the sheriff's office, enforcement and how, before we get too far down the road to say, all right, let's do this, how easy, I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything, but that's probably needs to be something that needs to be addressed, is if we put this in place, how easy is it to actually enforce? And is it something that will stand up through code compliance or through sheriff's office? So I guess that's the question.
I don't want to speak for the captain, but I will say that obviously we wouldn't propose anything in any new ordinance that couldn't be enforced or couldn't be held up to a legal challenge, and we would work with our village attorney before we brought it forward to the council. We would get the input of the sheriff's department regarding their concerns as well, so we would take those steps.
Okay, yeah, I just obviously don't want us to get all the way down the road and then say, no, we can't do that.
Right.
That's all. All right, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay.
Ken Phillipson, Islamorada. What's unique tonight is that he draws number 2, I draw number 2, and I filed a complaint against him. And my complaint was this. His property is zoned residential, and yet he has many commercial activities going on in that property with a noise level that's very disturbing. I've lived there 35 years, and for most of that time, I didn't have a problem. Anyway, what's unique is that being able to sit down and discuss this with Mark, I think we'll be able to resolve our differences. I can't fix his zoning problem, but he can fix that on his own. Thank you.
See, one good thing. That's good.
Hi, Sandy Basigli. I'm a full-time resident. I have two questions. One, under Section 1867 exemptions, letter J, it says there can be outdoor bans on approved commercial properties. And I was just wondering, my question is it also allowed in residential properties? Because in our neighborhood, we also deal with bands and DJs, but I don't see where it's allowed.
So it's approved commercial properties, so it would be if they were approved for commercial use. I think what you're referring to is the vacation rentals that then offer a wedding or...
No, or just, well, maybe, and or people who just have a big party and they hire a band and a DJ, and then hundreds of homes have to listen to that music for hours.
So I don't see where on here that's exempted, so they would have to follow the noise ordinance.
And my last question is cottage industry permits. I don't see anything about, and I'll give you an example, people in residential lots. I'll give you a real example. Somebody operating a sawmill 7 or 8 hours a day in their yard, 5 days a week. Sounds very commercial to me. But so are there permits for cottage industry that make noise?
Okay, thank you. I'll look into that.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on something Craig said, and I wanted to see if I could put Captain Paul on the spot for just a little bit. He and I have talked about the enforcement side of this before, and I think that's something you should hear about first before you go dreaming up ways to control this. So, Captain, if you wouldn't mind, we spoke about amplified music and I think construction and lawn equipment before, and then tell them the pros and cons of a decibel meter.
So I'll start with the decibel meter first. That's what the ordinance used to read, countywide. I think, don't quote me on this, it was like 300 decibels for 3 consecutive minutes or something like that. The first issue that we found with that years ago was even a live band doesn't really stay at 300 for 3 minutes consecutively. So every time, and I'll use the old full moon parties as an example. We responded to that constantly about the Junkaroo band that would start up. And we would sit outside with the decibel meter and with the timer, and then at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, it would stop for a second. The decibel meter would go to 0, then it would start again, so the timer would start to get at 3 minutes. That was one issue. Another issue turned more into something to do with, I don't think it was ever set in case law, but there is an issue with the calibration of decibel meters, keeping them calibrated. How do we prove that they're reading properly? As law enforcement, we have with our breathalyzer machines, we have to get them calibrated monthly. With our radars, we have to get them calibrated twice annually. Same with our lasers. Every piece of equipment we use is calibrated constantly. We didn't have the means to get the decibel meters calibrated, number one. Number two, that was a big issue in the past. So currently, the way the ordinance works with respects to the Village of Islamorada, we pretty much do it the same way in the whole county because it's gone through our legal department. But what happens is specifically after hours, when code enforcement is not available, we'll respond to, I'll use the vacation rental. We respond to them quite often. And what we do is we document the noise by body camera and mostly by body camera. We'll have the deputy stand more than 50 feet from the property, and we'll record it on body camera. We'll make contact with who's responsible for the property. We will explain the ordinance to them, explain that they need to turn the music down, and what we will do is we will do what we call a field contact card, and we will forward that to code compliance. And code compliance, if it ever turns into an issue where it goes to a code hearing, the officer will be available, just like any other court appearance. We will make sure the officer is available to go and testify to the body camera. I will tell you that in my experience, 90% of the times we get compliance the first time. Most people turn it down, most. And that's, generally speaking, most people just, they don't want to deal with it. I know that there's, when it comes to businesses and so forth, people call, it could be 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we will still make contact with the business and ask them to turn it down. If it's too loud, we'll just say, hey, neighbors are complaining, we know you're exempt, but can you turn it down a little bit? And 99% of the time we get compliance. Excuse me. So, same with lawn equipment, and there's twofold with the lawn equipment. I mean, number one, you want your neighbors taking care of their property. You don't want it to look like, driving down the road and with weeds growing up. But generally speaking, we don't normally get an issue before the times that they're required or that they're allowed. But when we do, we do address that too. And lawn equipment, it's the same issue. It really doesn't usually fit under the, if you would go with the decibel reader, which I don't, it doesn't fall under that 300 decibel. And I just keep throwing that out because that's what it used to be. But, there's a lot of, noise has been an issue in this county. I've worked in Marathon, I've worked in Key Largo. This is nothing new. This is an issue that we've had in this county, especially now with a lot more vacation rentals. And generally speaking, that is mostly our violators, especially on weekends. We have certain subdivisions, I won't mention them, you guys know where they are, that we're constantly in there dealing with noise. And one of the issues, the noise ordinance doesn't really apply to a residence. There's no exemptions to a residence. So at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, if it's too loud, it's too loud, and we'll address it, and we will record it, and we will forward it if need be. And we don't generally, I don't have the numbers, but we generally don't get too many complaints on businesses nowadays. But when we do, we will address, we'll meet with the manager or meet with the band or the DJ and ask them to turn it down. Anything else?
Yeah, could you just give me one quick example? What is 300 decibels? What would that be like equivalent? Is there anything?
It's pretty loud, but you're asking the wrong guy. It was pretty loud. I can tell you, I know if anybody's been around, I know a lot of people have been around since the old days with the full moon parties. That Junkaroo band was 350 maybe at the highway. So, it constantly fluctuates. That's another issue with music, especially amplified music. So.
Thank you, Captain.
Thanks, Captain. I don't know, I guess I'll weigh in. As somebody who used to hear the complaints at the county and here at the village when I ran
You
code
just
enforcement
identify
and the
yourself.
building department. Who are you? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Don Horton. I thought everybody knew me.
You probably do, but
Who doesn't know me here? Anyway, I'm Don Horton, and of course, a retired building official for Islamorada, ran the code enforcement, and from the county as well, I was their building official. And the complaints, when I worked at the county, it was done by decibel meters. And, of course, I left the county in 2000 and here in Islamorada from 2000 to 2005. And this is just a reoccurrent discussion that this community has. We have always had this same ordinance, changed a little bit, times have changed a little bit, days have changed a little bit, but I feel like we're going to continue to have this conversation until we have something that's measurable. What's noisy to me may not be noisy to you. What bothers me, even as an ordinary person with ordinary, although I wear hearing aids, auditory senses, and maybe that's because of too many years of listening to loud rock and roll. I don't know, but unless it's measurable, I just don't know how anybody can constantly take a complaint. And nowadays, with the technology that we have, I know that it's used in Fort Lauderdale. It's used in areas of Miami where they've got the intercoastal waterway, and they've got businesses on one side and residents on the other. And there's a lot of businesses with their noise ordinance that they actually have monitors or sensors on their property line. And if the amplified music is too loud, those sensors automatically turn those amplifiers down. And so it helps the surrounding neighbors. At the same time, it helps the businesses so that they don't have to constantly take complaints. These meters actually monitor what's going on at the property. The complaints or the codes are always written where it's outside of the property, so it has to be in the public way or in the neighbors, if it complains. So, what bothers me is not necessarily what's going to bother you. So I think that we need to figure out a way to find a way to meter those. It'd be like me driving down the highway at 40 and Captain saying, Don, I felt like you were doing 45. And I'm going, no, Captain, I was only doing 40, but it looked like you were doing 45. But so how would we prove that, right? Of course, he's trained at how fast a car is and how fast it goes. And I'm not, so I'm going to be driving thinking I'm doing 40, but I might be doing 45. So I think we need to go with something that's measurable, or we're going to continue to have this discussion year after year or every fourth year or something. I know we had it twice when Deb was on council, and we're having it again. So that's just my thought.
I think Judy, you still have a comment? Judy had a comment down front.
And then I just want to have a brief comment about vacation rentals. I have a brief comment about vacation rentals.
Great.
All right, my comment is really just a suggestion. When we've done this before, Dave Fader has always been in the room, and he's the head of Islamorada Community Entertainment. He can talk the decibels with us all day long. This band brings it up to this level, and this band is softer. So my suggestion is I reached out to him, but let's make sure that he's in the conversation because he truly is an expert. And then when we talk residential, if we were in around this room, everyone would have a different thing. It could be someone restoring an antique car, which will shake the glass out of your house. Or, it could be a boat going down the canal. It's very different for everyone in the room. And so I think we have to keep that in mind, too. It's not just music.
Right, thank you. Russ had something, too, he wanted.
I'll just make it quick. Jennifer, thank you for holding this meeting. I'm really inspired by this gathering of lots of different people from lots of different places, and I look forward to this civilized discussion. So thank you.
This is going to be the last one, then we're going to move on to our fun part.
Russell Yeagle, I actually represent the landowner that is next to Mr. Mancini's wedding venue. So a couple things. I agree with Don Horton. You must have an objective standard. The county actually has both. It has a subjective standard and it has a 75 dB, I think is what the county has. I heard about this ordinary reasonable person 30 years ago in law school. I've been trying to find him ever since, okay? It is just too subjective of a standard. I suspect that if you were to look at the success rate of your numbers, you would probably, that would be borne out by that. I think the other thing is that most of the time, and I think it is amplified music that is the problem. Yes, there are other sources. Most of those are temporary, but it's usually amplified. And the problem my client has with Mr. Mancini is that though we call it a vacation rental, those are residential properties, okay, and they're effectively being turned into commercial venues. And so even, it's kind of an expectation analysis. When you live next to an airport, you kind of expect to have a little more noise. When you live next to a golf course, you expect to have a golf ball in your yard. So, part of it, I think, is that, people move into a residential neighborhood, they expect the normal noise associated with a residential neighborhood. They don't expect it to turn into a commercial venue. And so that's something that needs to be addressed, is the type of the zoning or the flum, and to say it shouldn't just be necessarily one number that we apply across the board. Maybe those expectations change based upon if you're next to a commercial venue or if you're in a residential area.
So I'm Deb Gillis, and yes, I sat on council, and yes, I think it was at least twice that we had this discussion. And I was just going to bring up the fact that we had, it was actually a business, but it could apply to vacation rentals or any other noise venue, one that did not want to come into compliance, and they finally came into compliance, and they put up noise baffles, I'll call them. I don't know exact terms that they did, but it resolved the problem because we went and we negotiated, I guess, with that person and to make the noise stop. And that was part of the problem, was it was across the water. We are a water community. We're going to have that problem, so.
We put ice and glass on.
One more in the back, the gentleman in the blue shirt, and then we're going to move on to the round table.
I'm Mike Wilkinson of Isla Mirada. I'm kind of going to piggyback off you, sir, and it does have to be subjective, and it is primarily pertaining to music, as we all know. But for an establishment like Lorelei, where the residential is really far spread out, whether it be across the water or inside of the neighborhood and off of Madeira, our music doesn't affect anyone. So like you said, it does have to be subjective, and it can't be a certain decimal amount that's applied across the village, because some areas are going to be louder than others when it pertains to residential. Our music never goes past 10 o'clock anyway, so I don't really think it's going to be that big of an issue. I know we're trying to do earlier than that, but it does, like you said, have to be subjective, sir, because of the area.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so that was all great stuff, but we're going to move on now to the roundtable discussion and breakout session. So what I'd like everybody to do is at your table, choose one person at your table. It can be the staff person if you have a staff person at your table, or if you don't, it can be one of you to be the scribe, to take notes for the table. I just want you all to have like an honest discussion with each other about what are the noise issues in the community, what are you seeing, what are you hearing, sorry, I had to do it. And what do you think changes we could make? How could we make it better? And then we're going to do that for about a half an hour, and then for about 15 minutes, I want you to look at that list and come up with the top 3 or 4 for your table and highlight those for us. And then during the break, we're going to put those top 3 or 4 together for each table, and we're going to come back and have a larger discussion. So that's where we are right now, and I just want everybody to have a chance to speak, because I know some people don't like to speak on the mic in front of a larger group, so I thought this was a good setting to do that. So have at it. Good luck. Okay, everybody, we got about 10 or 15 minutes left if you want to narrow down your topics. Everybody, you got 5 more minutes if you can narrow down your top 3 or 4 hot topics. Okay, everybody, we're going to wrap it up now. If you have your top 3 or 4 and you've written them down, if you could get them to Jamie here in the pink shirt. And then we're going to take a little bit of break. We have some sandwiches and fruit, some cookies and water, so help yourselves during the break, and we'll get back to you probably in about 15 minutes. So help yourselves, stretch your legs, get to know each other a little better. We have a lot of food, so don't be shy. Okay, we're gonna get back to the report back now. Everybody wants to take a seat. You can continue to eat. We have a ton of food left, and I'm not taking it home, so we're gonna get back now. Thanks, whoever's doing that, Jamie. You can continue to eat while we do our report back. The food's going to stay out. We have plenty of food, so help yourselves. Right now, we're just going to do some report out of what happened in your discussion groups. Jamie took your, top 3 or 4. There was probably some crossover amongst the groups. So she consolidated and she typed them into the report for us here. So we're going to go through, and what I'd like to do is ask if somebody from one of the tables who had one of these issues, maybe explain a little bit about what they're referring to, or what their suggestion is, or if they want to elaborate a little bit more on it. So we're going to need the mic again, Jamie. So the first one is vacation rentals, enforcement fines, and how many. So does anybody want to tackle that for us? What were you guys talking about?
How many violations do we have?
How many violations? Okay, does anybody want to tackle that from any one of the tables?
I know we discussed that a little bit. Just I've got a vacation rental myself. You know what I mean? It's above our bar, so we don't complain too much, but we know how much of an issue vacation rentals are throughout the community and how much money they bring in for the owners. So if their tenants, customers, or whatever you want to call them, are being noisy, maybe that could help them police themselves to keep the noise down. If they know if they're too noisy, they could lose their license. That's going to be a big deal for the owners to try to, again, just regulate themselves. I think through a lot of these different things, the more self-regulation you can do, the better, as opposed to trying to mandate things. But so that just might help that, put some of it on the owners to keep their tenants in check.
And as far as how many violations, was that just keep track of how many violations, or did anybody have?
Did you want to answer that? Was it noise?
Well, what it came down to is if you get a certain number of violations, then you pull their license. Or there are so many illegal vacation rentals too, that if there's, a number of noise complaints, to be double checking and investigate to find out if they are illegal vacation rentals, that could all kind of tie into the same thing.
Perfect, thank you. Does anybody else want to talk about this topic before we move to the next one?
Yes, what we talked about was the enforcement of the vacation rentals, but then how many times can a vacation rental have an event?
Well, and what is very ironic is that these two lovely gentlemen have, neighboring properties. And so what we were talking about is, so if one person is using their house as a vacation rental and then the neighbor does, and then you have this ongoing, competing weddings, what does that look like? That's the scenario we're creating when we don't kind of set some limitations on what can happen in the vacation rental, which again is hypothetical, but I mean, not really. You could start your vacation rental business tomorrow with your wedding venue tomorrow. So it's very puzzling, interesting.
Great.
But it suggests that there should be some formal procedure around how we regulate it.
Great. Okay, so the next one is bands and orientation or location of the stage for bands to minimize noise, educate about noise ordinance, and have them sign an understanding. Who wants to have that? It looks like somebody has the mic already.
Hi, I'm Larissa. I work here. So this was, yes, there. This was kind of tied in with the next one as well, but as an operator, I had to learn the hard way when I was in the way of my surrounding neighbors, and sometimes when we disagreed about what was reasonable. But I think there are a lot of things that you can do, as someone mentioned, if Dave Fader knows a lot about sound when it comes to live music, to provide resources to operators to help them not have to learn the hard way. So at the location that has been talked about a lot in this room that we are planning, from the beginning, the sound engineering was a big part of the conversation. How do we mitigate our sound creation based on size of speakers, placement of the music, technology that you can use to lower zones or whatever. It's a lot easier to do in the planning stage than when you're thinking about it 2 years later after you've had a lot of noise complaints. So the idea was in the planning stage, education and information for operators who want to be good neighbors or want to be better neighbors to know what to do. Best practices.
That's a great suggestion, thanks. Anyone else want to tackle this one? Good, okay. The next one is surround sound speaker size. Same thing, okay, perfect. Amplified music in residentially zoned properties. Who wants to take that one? Anyone? Someone had it on their sheet.
I think it's redundant of the other ones. The vacation rentals, as I understand the code, generally fall in residential areas. So,
yes, they do.
And then we've had the discussion about the wedding venues. But the fundamental problem seems to be most everybody's raising is whether it's residential and whether it's a vacation rental or not. Your neighbor, should be respectful as well. And so it's really, we think, focused more. Generally speaking, your complaints are loud music in residential neighborhoods, whether it's a vacation rental or not. That seems to be the primary area of concern. Is that right, ladies?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Word for word. Look at that.
That's why he's the lawyer.
And a quick point to make, since everyone's talking about our area and my property, there's 2 residential properties that abut to a commercial hotel. And there is always kids yelling, there is always music playing, there's fireworks going off. And, so yes, we're residential, we're zoned residential, we have a license to do vacation rentals, which allows us to do commerce, rent out the property, and allows for events without having to be a commercial property. So the residential portion of it falls underneath the short-term rentals. But again, the zone residential, there are places where you have, I don't know why, there is a hotel in between a dozen homes. Don't know how that happened, but it did. And a buffer zone is a short-term rental before there's residential, because you can't just go put houses next to it and expect it to be quiet when you're next to a hotel.
Great. Anyone else on that one? Oh, down here in the front.
Okay, we also listed amplified music in residential zone properties, such as hiring a band and DJ, and apparently it's not covered in the exemptions, as you had mentioned before, and that's why we listed it. Does that cover it?
You mean like for a private party or?
No, that's a different. Pardon me?
You mean like for a private party or?
A private party that's held outside that has a DJ and loud music.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Yeah, the next one would be previous noise ordinance had proposed had times, days regulated, Sundays and holidays. Why not adopt it? Well, maybe somebody who's been here longer than me can answer that question. You need the mic.
I was looking at Mark and he was ignoring me.
Oh. Hello. Because the Sundays and the holidays, we have all sorts of activities going on, from lawn maintenance, leaf blowers, hedge trimmers, construction. They come in, they even stay during the night with tile saws. They'll run outside, cut the tile, then come back in and lay the tile. It just doesn't stop. And now with so many of these beautiful homes having outdoor kitchens, large TVs, and they want to come home from church only to the sound of all the construction or whatever is going on. And it's a shame, because that's part of our, part of your mission is to give us quiet, peaceful enjoyment. And, I can give you one example, and I think I even sent it into the village. It went on a Sunday, and it was a beautiful day. You could open your windows, and they had a lift that was painting a house, and every 5 feet up, 5 feet down, 5 feet over, 5 feet to the left, beep, beep, beep. It went on all day long on a Sunday. And you had to go in. You had to be in your house. Okay. So I would like to see some regulation to the times on Sundays and holidays. Okay. I think it's only fair. So, thank you.
Does anybody else want to address that? It looks like there's people that might want to talk to that.
And that was on the residential side, just like, more for the contractors and landscapers and stuff like that, not so much for, yeah, probably.
I use my lift all the time. Who? Mark? Oh, who?
Okay,
No? I was. The only reason I was saying is because you were on council last time we brought it up. So they were asking why it wasn't adopted.
Get Mark to address that.
Okay. I'm not speaking about that right now. So, by way of history, the way I remember things a couple of years ago, we had discussions and meetings and maybe a workshop about this, and there was two sides to the coin. So, as you see on the wall, there's the residents' right of quiet enjoyment, and in this part of the country, Sunday morning has generally been a quiet time, and some people attend a house of worship and observe that as a quiet day. Other people use it as their off day to catch up on household chores and duties and contractors' build. So there was the balance between the right of quiet enjoyment and someone's right to earn a living. And we tried things. We discussed, well, maybe, you don't start working Sunday till afternoon, or Saturday, less hours than on the weekday. And we just really couldn't come to a good balance that everybody could embrace. And so I was hopeful that that might come back up again tonight. But, it's complicated, I'll say that. And it's difficult because folks have to earn a living. And folks have a right to be quiet and enjoy the quiet in their own home. So how do we do that? I was hoping you all could answer that, because we couldn't do it. So if I hope that answered your questions. We never could get it to a point where we vote. Maybe Deb remembers. Can I throw her under the bus now?
Yeah, I was sitting on LPA trying to come up with that answer for you. We made some suggestions and threw it to council to find out, and yes, we tried to make some inroads as to the quiet enjoyment plus the people that have the second and third jobs of trying to make a living so that they can stay here. And yeah, one of the things was to back it off a little bit on the weekends, but not to void weekends. We could pull that back up and look at it. The LPA worked very hard at coming up with an idea on that, and it just didn't go anywhere at the time. I was going to also add the amplified music in residential zoning districts. You did a great job, Russ, talking about it. You did. But we were talking about the fact that it's not necessarily a particular event that's going on. It's somebody that's come down for the weekend. They really have, it's a second home for them, and they've come down for the weekend to enjoy the surroundings, and maybe not even the weekend, maybe through the week they've come down, and they throw their own party. It's not a big affair, but they're noisy and loud because they're enjoying themselves. But there needs to be maybe not the same limits on time and restrictions as we have on commercial, but something applied to residential as well.
Thank you. Anyone else on that? Someone in the back, Jamie? The back.
Yeah, Craig Limback. I don't see really where the city should be making a thing about this Sunday stuff. Most contractors, I was born and raised here, I do work 7 days a week. 5 or 6 days a week I have to survive. Sundays after church I do mow my lawn, and I'm sorry, okay? But if you're a neighbor, why don't we get back to knowing each other? Call the neighbor. Say, hey, I'm trying to sleep here. I'm trying to do this. You know how many times they come over when I'm jackhammering a pool on a Sunday? Guy goes, hey, I got friends in town. Do you mind? Hell no, let me off the machine. I'm ready to go home. But just let's try to, don't make so many more laws. For God's sakes, we got enough. Thank you.
All right. On the next one is leave the same question mark. Did start times okay? Earlier would be problematic to businesses. I'm guessing you have something to say.
I might. We were discussing that adamantly over here, and that's that if everyone has been abiding by the rules that have been set forth for such a long duration of time, why modify them to appease just a few and disturb the masses? It doesn't make any sense to me personally, and I believe most of the people at this table were in agreement to that. And 10 o'clock is not an absurd time. It's not terribly late. It's not 11 o'clock, and that's just that hour difference as well. But 9 o'clock would be detrimental, such to as a business as myself or Islamorada Fish Company, where we do our business around sunset. That's where a good chunk of our business comes from. If I tell a band they can't be there at 9 o'clock, but the sunset doesn't set till 8, I'm paying a band to leave early when everyone's still there. And if you had issues with people disregarding the time set forth, like if we were constantly playing music at 11 o'clock or if other entities were, then okay, it makes sense. But to disturb the masses to appease a few doesn't make any sense to me personally.
Thank you for that. Anybody else want to talk about this one? Down the front here, Jamie.
Thank you. I certainly concur with that. We had many, many years ago, when I was on the council, we negotiated the 11 o'clock hour because the businesses wanted it later, and so we negotiated 11 o'clock, and I really think it needs to stay that way.
The last one is firework. Oh, sorry. Well, no, that's okay.
Yeah, I think, one of the reasons actually in the beginning as far as code enforcement, questions is, again, if it's not broke, don't fix it, so to speak. So that's why I was wondering how much of a problem is it? I know, I'm not going to say it's not a problem, different areas are different problems. But again, if it's not a big, massive problem village-wide, then why should we fix it? And something we talked about at our table is working area by area, working with your neighbors. Hey, what's the problem? How can we solve this so, businesses can operate, residents can enjoy their life and try to coexist. Our island's not getting bigger. We're not getting more space. Obviously we got to figure out how to survive together. I know it's kind of a little kumbaya-ish and maybe too much, but it would be nice if something like that could happen.
Thank you. The last one is firework regulations. If anyone want to talk about this, I was just informed by the captain that fireworks. Oh, there is? Oh, I'm sorry.
It's not the last one.
Oh, I thought we were done almost. The last one on this slide. I was informed by Captain Paul that fireworks are regulated by the state, so we don't have a lot really to say about it, but does anybody wants to talk about firework regulations? I'd be happy to chat quickly. They say they believe you have to have a local license to do fireworks?
So state statute now, Governor DeSantis put in that on certain nights, on 4th of July, the New Year's, and I believe New Year's Day, they are now legal to fire off fireworks. So now during the rest of the year, the rest of the time, you're absolutely correct. Somebody would have to have a permit to do such because they are illegal the rest of the time. But there's been a lot of leniency given to fireworks since, I guess, the last couple of years. I'm not sure exactly what the state statute says anymore, because I really haven't paid much attention to it, but I do know that he's given some leniency towards it. Used to be illegal no matter what, but now it is covered under state statute.
Now are fire, big mortars going off and bottle rockets considered the same thing?
They are now. They used to not be, but anything that blew up or self-propelled, we were not allowed, they were illegal. But now the governor has given the clearance to all that on certain nights. Certain days, but the village does have a provision in the code that if Florida Brew wants to fire fireworks off, they have to have a permit. Or if somebody at a wedding wants to do it, they're supposed to have a permit. And the proper person with a license, pyrotechnic license to do such. That does not apply on those holidays.
But if, like my son lights off a Roman candle.
On
I said my son, not me.
Let the mind do it. On those certain nights, they're legal. So.
I think that's what he's referring to. We'll have to get more information on that. Thank you. All right, our next
Ken
slide.
Tafoya.
Oh, there's one more.
One question.
Sorry.
Okay, so if we decide to put some fireworks off, how long does it take to get the permit?
I'm not even sure who issues the permit, to be honest with you. The planning department doesn't issue that permit, so I don't know how long that would take.
Ask Chief Abel. That's where I'd go.
Yeah. I think, fire department probably.
Fire marshal, barge, the Coast Guard has to approve it.
I think Terry Abel
Yeah.
had to approve it. And I think there's only one vendor here that's licensed. You have to have a licensed vendor as well.
Oh.
Paul Bates was one, and then there was another one that Paul used to do the Geo.
Good information. Anyone else on fireworks? Okay. So the slide I didn't know about. Recommend new technology, i.e. silent disco. I guess we're coming over here to this table.
Silent disco. That's this.
I know what a silent disco is. I watch a lot of Bravo. They do them on Bravo.
We were talking more about what Larissa had said about new technology and speakers, and kind of what Don said about setting up peripheral, zones to where you can, regulate the sound. And there's, I think, some new sound speakers that, create a wall of some sort. So that's more. And then some people are saying after 11 o'clock, if you really want to get into it, then you can get into the silent disco. And if you haven't heard of that, I think it's where you wear headphones and dance and look at each other kind of weird.
Well, it makes sense to you because you hear the music, but everybody looking at you thinks you're crazy.
Especially the people that are looking that don't have those on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, but there could be other people serving food that are whoa, it's weird. So how about consistent enforcement here?
Sure.
I'll have a silent disco now from now on.
All right.
I like that, new technology. Keep that going.
Consistent enforcement, code/law enforcement. Should it be one or the other? Anybody want to talk about that before I talk about it?
Let the captain do it. He carries the gun.
So because it's in our village code, code enforcement is our code enforcement authority. And then the sheriff's office is sort of their backup when they're not available. That's how it works. Deb, did you want to add anything?
Well, we did have a short discussion about that, and we talked about the fact that maybe it was so short that it would have to be aired out more, but maybe the law enforcement should have the ability to write a citation, because most code enforcements are, they have 10 days to correct it. Well, if you have picking on vacation rental, in 10 days, it's probably different people. So we were trying to think of a shorter way of doing the enforcement, and we talked about the officer being able to write some kind of citation, but then that also puts the officer at risk of being called the judge. So it would have to be aired out, but that could be a way to make it move forward a little better.
I have a question for the captain. You said that most of the time if you go to a vacation rental and you tell them 90% of them comply and turn the music down, what happens if you have to go back the second time or a third time? Can you write them up, or is there more enforcement that takes place then?
What we do is we document it and refer to code. So again, like I was talking earlier with the body cameras and so forth, we'll document it and refer it to code enforcement. We deal with state statute. We generally try not to deal with code enforcement, and there's a lot of reasons why. So let's just use some police departments. A lot of police departments do code enforcement, right? So I respond to a domestic at your house, and now you have a illegal downstairs enclosure, and I start getting involved in that. Maybe your spouse is not so willing to call me next time you're having a domestic. So we tend to, as a sheriff's office, separate ourselves from code enforcement. Doesn't mean that we won't back them up, doesn't mean that we won't refer stuff, but we generally, as a sheriff's office, do not enforce code, and that's countywide. There are a few exceptions. For instance, Alamorada has a swim zone in a certain neighborhood, and they have a 300-foot rule on being on a plane. They have the 300-foot rule during mini season and all that whole thing about diving. The state and federal government will not enforce that. Code enforcement doesn't have the ability to have boats, so we do step up and help out in that category. We do enforce some parking code. However, we generally tend to write state statute instead of code when it comes to parking. But code enforcement and law enforcement it's a fine line, and we generally, as the sheriff's office countywide, do not get involved in code enforcement. That's the issue. That's one of the reasons why we refer and get all the evidence we can get for code enforcement and testify for them if we need to. But we generally don't write code violations.
So you can't actually force them to turn music down or write them a citation?
Well, there's some state statutes we can start tweaking for breach of peace and all that. It takes a lot. I mean, it's not like I can just go there the first time and take somebody out in handcuffs. You also have a lot of, when you're talking about residential property, there's a lot of rights that the person in the house has that I don't have the right just to. If I come to your house for anything, like let's just say a noise complaint, it's not a violation of state statute, so to speak, at the time, and I don't have the right. So if you tell me to leave your property, as a law enforcement officer, I have to leave your property. I don't have the right to trespass, just like anybody else doesn't have the right to trespass. There has to be circumstances that give me the right to enter that property, and then that runs on to, the curtilage, the outside. Then when I run into, if I have to go into a residence, it's a whole other set of circumstances that I have to have. So it's not just easy for me to walk up, and people are allowed to tell me to beat it. I mean, it doesn't give me there's no exceptions, especially when it comes to civil infractions. I don't have the right to force people on certain things. Now, again, if it continues and there's stuff that we can do to make it a criminal case, but it's a misdemeanor case. Again, I walk up to your door, now I'm going to arrest you, knock on your door for a misdemeanor, you say, no, I'm not opening the door. I don't have the right to kick your door in. So there's a lot of things that take place for us to be able to, doesn't mean I can't get a warrant, come back for you in a week, but there's a whole lot of other circumstances involved with law enforcement getting involved with stuff for civil infractions. I guess is the best way to explain it.
I think we have a question in the front.
Yep.
There's actually a really easy way to solve this. There are 2 devices that will not only monitor sound inside a house, but if someone is smoking. And one thing a vacation rental owner knows, you don't want anyone smoking in your home, and you don't want parties going on. I don't know if any vacation rental owner will not spend $150 on a device to put in the house, and then if it gets to a certain decibel level, if it gets a sustained level, it'll go off, it texts to the owner. You won't get called, you won't get called. The owner calls the guest and says, turn that crap off or we're booting you, because we have that in our rental agreement. We can remove you for smoking and for noise, and if they're smoking, they're out. This should be put strictly on the homeowners to solve all your problems. I've been doing vacation rentals for 12 years. I have courses on it. They can just reach out to me. I'll tell you how to do it real quickly and easily, solve this problem nip it in the bud.
Okay, are we missing any information? Have we looked at other island communities? What are they doing? I do know that we did do some research on other communities a couple years ago. We do have that information, so as we move forward in this process, if we're going to make some recommendations, we will obviously look at those communities as well. But does anyone want to add anything to that?
Actually, I want to ask you, what communities did you look at? I'm curious.
I'm going to let Jamie answer. Well, I'm going to let Jamie answer that question because she did.
Off the top of my head right now, I don't have New Smyrna, Marathon, Key West, Marco Island, Ocean Reef. There was like 8 or 10. Those are just the ones off the top of my head.
Pre-storm? New Smyrna or...
What do you mean pre-storm?
Pre-hurricane.
Their ordinances, we just pulled their ordinances. Didn't get into when they were written, but we just pulled their ordinances. And it's in a spreadsheet. It has each of the, we can get it to you guys.
I think what we were requiring to was not what their ordinance were, but how effective they've been.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know if we're gonna spend the time calling everybody.
Yeah, we haven't done that yet. No.
We haven't done that.
I think that's what it boils down to. Is obviously every place has their own rules and policies in place, but how effective have areas that are similar to our area have been in implementing those is what it would come down to.
Well, one of those places that they discussed was Marathon. So, I mean,
Key West, Marathon.
So, I mean, what was it like before the ordinance
Ocean Reef.
came out, and what was it like after? Do we know?
Well, we don't know how long the ordinances were there. I mean, a lot of people's codes were written just like ours many, many moons ago, but yeah. Well, Monroe County, I think most of them adopted all the way down. I mean, like it was Monroe County, so if they made any changes, you could look and see when the ordinance was changed in their code, but we didn't get into that much detail.
So we don't quite know what they're doing.
Huh?
Marathon has the same ordinance with Village.
Okay. There might be some.
There might be a few tweaks.
Yeah.
But generally, it's the same process. We document it as law enforcement agency.
Some of them had decibels and some of them didn't, so.
Hey, it's working a marathon in here, so it must work. Why change it? Sorry.
Okay.
But we do have that information that we can get out to you guys, what we did previously. And then we can add to it if you guys want us to add to it.
Okay. Measurable within property lines by place, start and stop times. Anyone want to tackle that one?
That one was off
You have to be careful if you're measuring within property lines, because some houses have now been built as close as 5 foot to the property line. So you have to be careful where you take your measurement, and if you're measuring the decibel readings.
I think that the group just was acknowledging the sort of the unique and haphazard nature of our zoning, where we have commercial and residential butting up against each other, and I think we've referred to it as well. Like there might be, this might deal with certain neighborhoods. We might deal with certain neighborhoods or properties differently. It might be hard to make blanket rules.
Anyone else on that one?
Oh, sorry.
So I think she just jumped to acknowledgement of haphazard zoning. Anyone else want to jump on that one before we move on? Okay, great.
Did you want to, is there anything that was on your paper that I'm sorry, Jennifer. It's just, I gave them all back their papers, so.
So if there's anything on your paper that didn't get talked about that you want to mention, let us know. We can mention it quickly. No? Okay, perfect. So next steps. So this was great. I think this was a great session. We got a lot of great information. The purpose of tonight, like I said at the beginning, was to get feedback from the community, to get a lot of information. Now staff is going to go back and take that information and review all the data that we got, review, all of your input and your suggestions and how that might influence any potential recommendations that we would make to the council for changes to the noise ordinance. That's not to say that there definitely will be or that there won't be. It's just this is how we collect the data, right? So moving forward, we may or may not propose amendments to the ordinance. Any amendment would go through the village council in a public hearing process. There may also be future workshops on noise if we get back and we see all this data and we decide, we need some more information. We didn't get quite enough, or we need some more clarification. We may do another one of these in the future just to see where people stand on certain things, or maybe more focalizing on certain topics. So we might do that as well. So that's why it's important to sign in for us, please, at the sign-in table, so that we have your contact information. We can keep you informed of what's happening with next steps here. And then we'll stay informed. Also want to remind you on one of your index cards in front of you, if you want to jot down any other topics for workshops, and you can leave them either on the table or with one of staff. We'd be happy to look at whatever you want us to talk about. I like doing workshops. It's one of my things, so I'll happy to do more of these. As many as you guys want to do, we'll do them. So that's where we're at. Does anybody have any final questions or anything before we move on? Mr. Horton first.
Don, please.
Don.
I just wanted to thank you for this. It's been a long time since we've had a community meeting, and thank you for
Thank
doing
you.
this and for releasing
Thank you. Mr. Ushmeyer, do you have anything?
I was piggybacking on the same thing. It's so nice to have a discussion that everybody can get involved. And I know we've been in the past, in January, we were supposed to have one about the baseball field. There's been a lot of them that have been supposed to come up. So I guess, I'm glad that this came about tonight, and I hope that everybody gets the idea, whether it's you that call their workshops or whether it's council members, that they are indeed a very good step to get the community more involved and to get the idea. So thanks again for having us here.
No, thank you all for participating. See, food gets butts in the seats, so there you go. But no, thank you all for participating. We couldn't do it without you all and all your input, so I really appreciate all your participation. Any last words or comments?
This was a lot more enjoyable than the council meetings.
Perfect. Thank you. Have a good night. Drive safe.